The blood-red sun cast long shadows across the Montana prairie as Valerie Morgan scrambled through the golden wheat fields, her heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. Behind her, the smoke from her family's burning homestead billowed into the evening sky, a stark monument to all she had lost that day. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face as she ran, her once fine dress torn and soiled, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins. She had to keep moving, had to find somewhere to hide before they found her too. The year was 1885, and the Montana Territory was still a wild, untamed place where law came second to power, and power often came from the barrel of a gun. Valerie had witnessed this truth firsthand when the men had come, demanding her father sell their land. When he refused, they'd made good on their threats. The wheat rustled around her as she pushed deeper into the field, hoping to lose herself in its golden embrace. Her lungs burned from exertion, and her legs trembled with each step. Finally, when she could run no more, she collapsed to her knees, burying her face in her hands as sobs racked her slender frame. "Please, God," she whispered, "help me." The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her freeze. Someone was coming. Quickly, she lay flat on her stomach, making herself as small as possible among the tall stalks of wheat. The hoofbeats grew louder, then slowed to a walk. Valerie held her breath, praying that whoever it was would pass by without noticing her. The horse stopped. She could hear the creak of leather as the rider dismounted. "I know you're in there," a deep voice called out. It wasn't threatening, but it was firm. "I can see where you've trampled the wheat." Valerie remained still, terror gripping her heart. Footsteps approached, and then the wheat parted above her. Looking up, she found herself staring into the most intense blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He wore a dusty Stetson and simple range clothes, a cowboy, not one of the men who had attacked her home. He knelt beside her, his expression softening when he saw her tear-streaked face. "Are you hurt, miss?" Valerie scrambled backward, still not trusting. "Stay away from me." The cowboy raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you. I saw the smoke from miles away, came to see what was happening." His eyes took in her disheveled appearance, the fear in her eyes. Those weren't ordinary bandits, were they? She shook her head, unable to speak through her tears. "My name's Quinn Blackwood," he said gently. "I have a ranch about 5 miles east of here. You can come with me, get cleaned up, have something to eat. You'll be safe there." "How do I know I can trust you?" Valerie managed to ask, her voice trembling. Quinn's eyes were steady on hers. "You don't, but staying out here alone isn't an option. Night's coming, and so is a storm." He nodded toward the darkening sky to the west. "Whatever happened back there, I'm guessing you need help." Valerie glanced back toward her home, where the smoke still climbed skyward. She had nowhere else to go. Her nearest neighbors were 20 miles away, and she couldn't make that journey on foot. When she didn't respond, Quinn sighed and stood. "I'll be heading back to my horse now." "You're welcome to join me, or you can stay here. Your choice." He turned and began walking away. "Wait," Valerie called, struggling to her feet. Her legs were weak, and she swayed unsteadily. Quinn turned back, and in 2 long strides he was beside her, catching her arm to steady her. "Easy now." "My name is Valerie," she said, meeting his eyes. "Valerie Morgan." A small smile touched his lips. "Well, Miss Morgan, let's get you somewhere safe." He led her to where his horse waited, a handsome chestnut gelding that tossed its head impatiently as they approached. Quinn helped her mount, then swung up behind her. Valerie stiffened at the closeness, but there was no way around it. "Don't hide from me again," Quinn said quietly as he urged the horse forward. "Whatever trouble you're in, it's safer if I know where you are." As they rode away from the wheat field, Valerie couldn't help but look back at the billowing smoke that marked all she had ever known. Her home, her parents, her life, all gone in an afternoon of violence. Tears threatened again, but she fought them back. There would be time for grief later. For now, she needed to survive. Quinn kept the horse at a steady pace, mindful of the extra rider. "Your family's farm back there?" he asked after they'd ridden in silence for several minutes. "Yes," Valerie replied, her voice hollow. "My parents, they killed them." "Because my father wouldn't sell the land." Quinn's arm tensed around her waist. "Who did?" "Men working for Maxwell Hartley. The name tasted bitter on her tongue. He's been buying up all the land around Broken Creek. I know Hartley, Quinn said, his voice hardening. He's been trying to push me out too, sent men to threaten my ranch hands, poison my water holes. Why does he want the land so badly? Railroads coming through. Land that was worth nothing last year is worth a fortune now. They fell silent again as the first raindrops began to fall. Quinn urged the horse into a trot, and Valerie held onto the saddle horn, trying to ignore the warmth of the man behind her, the strength in the arm that kept her secure. The rain was falling steadily by the time they reached Quinn's ranch, a modest spread with a solid log house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Light glowed from the windows, and smoke curled from the stone chimney. It looked like a haven to Valerie's exhausted eyes. As they rode into the yard, the front door opened, and an older woman hurried out, holding a shawl over her head. Quinn, I was getting worried with this storm coming in. The woman stopped short when she saw Valerie. Who's this? Quinn dismounted and helped Valerie down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, and he kept a steadying hand on her elbow. Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Valerie Morgan. She's going to be staying with us for a while. He turned to Valerie. Mrs. Abernathy is my housekeeper. She'll help you get settled. The older woman's eyes widened, taking in Valerie's disheveled state, but she didn't ask questions. Of course. Come inside, dear. Let's get you dried off and into some clean clothes. Valerie followed the housekeeper into the house, acutely aware of how out of place she must look. The interior was simple but comfortable, with solid furniture and a few touches that spoke of a woman's hand in the past. Embroidered cushions, a colorful quilt draped over the back of a rocking chair. Quinn's sister Mary made those, Mrs. Abernathy said, noticing Valerie's gaze on the cushions. Before she moved east with her husband, now it's just Quinn and me rattling around in this big house. She led Valerie to a bedroom off the main living area. This was Mary's room. You can use it for now. The room was small but neat, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, and a simple wooden wardrobe. I'll bring you some hot water and find you something to wear, Mrs. Abernathy said. Those clothes are beyond saving, I'm afraid. When the older woman had gone, Valerie sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day crashing over her like a wave. Her parents were dead. Her home was gone. She was alone in the world, dependent on the kindness of a stranger. Tears welled up again, and this time she let them come, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She didn't know how long she sat there weeping, but eventually there was a gentle knock at the door. Mrs. Abernathy entered with a large pitcher of steaming water and a bundle of clothing. Here you are, dear. These were Mary's. They might be a bit large, but they'll do until we can get you something else. The housekeeper set the pitcher on the washstand and laid the clothes on the bed. Her kind eyes took in Valerie's tear-stained face. I don't know what's happened to you, miss, but you're safe here. After the older woman left, Valerie washed away the dirt and tears, wincing as the hot water touched the scrapes and bruises she'd accumulated in her desperate flight. The clothes, Mrs. Abernathy had brought a simple blue cotton dress, and undergarments were indeed a bit large, but clean and whole. She found a hairbrush on the washstand and worked the tangles out of her long auburn hair, then braided it loosely. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, she found Quinn and Mrs. Abernathy in the kitchen. The delicious smell of beef stew filled the air, making Valerie's stomach growl. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, a lifetime ago. Quinn looked up as she entered, his eyes widening slightly. He stood, displaying the manners of a gentleman rather than a rough cowboy. Miss Morgan, he said, his voice softer than before, you look much better. Thank you, Valerie replied, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. And thank you for the clothes and for taking me in. No need for thanks, Quinn said. No decent person would have left you out there. Please sit and eat. The stew was hearty and delicious, and Valerie realized how hungry she was. For a while they ate in silence, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the drumming of rain on the roof. Miss Morgan, Quinn finally said, setting down his spoon, I need to know what happened today. Not just for your sake, but for mine too. If Hartley's men are burning homesteads and killing people, I need to be prepared. Valerie set down her own spoon, her appetite suddenly gone. They came this afternoon, 4 men on horseback. They said Mr. Hartley had made my father a generous offer for our land and it was time to accept it. She swallowed hard. My father refused. He said the land was ours, fair and square, and no amount of money would make him sell. She stared down at her half-empty bowl, seeing not the stew but the terrible events of the day. They shot him, right there on our porch. My mother screamed and ran to him, and they shot her too. Her voice broke. I ran inside and hid in the root cellar. They ransacked the house, looking for me, I think. Then they set it on fire. Quinn's jaw tightened, his eyes cold with anger. And you escaped through the root cellar, Valerie nodded. When I couldn't hear them anymore, I climbed out and ran. I just ran as far and as fast as I could. That's when you found me. Did you recognize any of the men? Quinn asked. One of them, a man named Vince. He works for Hartley. I've seen him in town. Mrs. Abernathy, who had been listening silently, made a small sound of distress. Those poor souls. We should ride to town tomorrow, Quinn. Tell Sheriff Donovan. Quinn's laugh was bitter. Sheriff Donovan is in Hartley's pocket. He won't do anything. Then what can we do? Valerie asked, looking between them. For tonight we rest, Quinn said firmly. Tomorrow I'll ride to what's left of your homestead, see if there's anything to salvage, and then we'll figure out our next move. His eyes met Valerie's. I promise you, Miss Morgan, Hartley will not get away with this. The intensity in his voice should have frightened her, but instead Valerie felt a small flicker of hope. For the first time since watching her parents fall, she didn't feel completely alone. After dinner, exhaustion hit Valerie like a physical blow. She excused herself and returned to the bedroom, where she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. She woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, she was confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory returned, and with it, grief so sharp it took her breath away. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Miss Morgan, Mrs. Abernathy called. Breakfast is ready when you are. Thank you, Valerie replied, forcing herself to sit up. I'll be right there. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Abernathy alone, setting a plate of bacon and eggs on the table. Quinn's already gone out, the housekeeper explained. He said to tell you he's riding to your homestead and he'll be back by noon. Valerie nodded, both relieved and disappointed by his absence. Mrs. Abernathy, may I help with anything today? I don't want to be a burden. The older woman smiled kindly. You're no burden, dear, but if you're feeling up to it, I could use help with the washing and the vegetable garden. Valerie was grateful for the tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. By mid-morning, she had helped Mrs. Abernathy hang sheets on the line behind the house and weed the neat rows of vegetables that grew in a fenced patch nearby. She was kneeling in the dirt, pulling stubborn weeds from around the carrots, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. Quinn rode into the yard, leading a second horse, a dappled gray mare that Valerie recognized with a jolt, Willow. She exclaimed, getting to her feet and hurrying to the gate. The mare had been her mother's pride and joy, a gift from her father on their 10th wedding anniversary. Quinn dismounted and led both horses toward her. Found her wandering about a mile from your place, he said. Thought you might be glad to see a familiar face. Valerie reached out to stroke Willow's soft nose, tears pricking her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Did you find anything else? Quinn's expression turned grim. Not much. The house is gone, burned to the ground. I found some metal cooking pots and tools in the ashes. He hesitated. I also found your parents. I buried them proper under the big oak tree. Fresh grief washed over Valerie, but with it came a sense of gratitude. Thank you, she said again, her voice thick with tears. That's where they would have wanted to be. They loved that tree. My father proposed to my mother under it. Quinn nodded, his eyes gentle. I marked the graves with stones. When things are settled, we can get proper markers made. When things are settled, Valerie repeated. What does that mean, Mr. Blackwood? How can things ever be settled after what's happened? Quinn, he corrected. And I mean when Hartley has paid for what he's done. How? You said yourself the sheriff won't help. There are other kinds of justice, Miss Morgan. The hardness in his voice frightened her. You can't mean to go after him yourself. That would be suicide. I haven't decided what to do yet, Quinn admitted, but I won't let him destroy more lives. He changed the subject. I brought something else for you. Reaching into his saddlebag, he pulled out a small wooden box, its surface blackened by smoke. Found this in what was left of your house. Thought it might be important. Valerie took the box with trembling hands. It was her mother's jewelry box, containing the few precious pieces that had been passed down through her family. The outside was charred, but when she opened it, the contents were intact: a string of pearls, a gold locket, a pair of small diamond earrings, and her grandmother's wedding ring. How did you know to look for this? She asked, clutching the box to her chest. Quinn shrugged. My sister had a box like that, kept all her treasures in it, figured your mother might have done the same. The thoughtfulness of his action touched Valerie deeply. This man, who barely knew her, had not only saved her life but had also given her this precious connection to her past. Thank you, she said simply, unable to express the depth of her gratitude. You're welcome. His eyes lingered on her face for a moment. I need to tend to the horses. We'll talk more at dinner. As he led the animals toward the barn, Valerie watched him go. Struck by the contradiction, he presented a hard man capable of great gentleness, a stranger who had become her only ally in a world suddenly turned hostile. That evening after dinner, as Mrs. Abernathy cleared away the dishes, Quinn laid out his plan. I've been thinking, he said, his fingers drumming lightly on the tabletop. Hartley won't stop with your land, Miss Morgan. He wants everything from here to Broken Creek, including my ranch. Why? Valerie asked. You mentioned the railroad, but surely there's more to it than that. Quinn nodded. It's not just the railroad. There's talk of silver in these hills. Hartley wants to control it all: the land, the mining rights, the transportation. He's building himself an empire. At the cost of people's lives, Valerie said bitterly. Yes, Quinn's eyes were hard. Which is why he needs to be stopped, but we can't do it alone. We need evidence of his crimes, and we need witnesses willing to testify. Who would stand against him? Everyone's terrified. Not everyone, Quinn said. There's a circuit judge coming through in 3 weeks, Judge Hammond. He has a reputation for being honest, and he answers to the territorial governor, not local interests, if we can build a case against Hartley by then. 3 weeks, Valerie repeated. What happens in the meantime? What if Hartley's men come looking for me here? Let them come, Quinn said grimly. They'll find more than they bargained for. Quinn, Mrs. Abernathy said warningly from the sink, don't talk foolishness. It's not foolishness, Mrs. A, it's reality. Hartley's used to getting his way through intimidation and violence. He's not used to people standing up to him. And how many men does he have? The housekeeper demanded. 20, 30, against you and the 2 ranch hands you've got left. Quinn's silence was answer enough. I should leave, Valerie said suddenly. Go to Helena or Great Falls, somewhere Hartley can't find me. No, Quinn said sharply. Running won't solve anything. Hartley would still have your land and he'd still come after mine. Besides, his voice softened. You're safer here with us than alone on the trail. I don't want anyone else hurt because of me, Valerie insisted. It's not because of you, Quinn countered. It's because of Hartley's greed, and I was fighting him before you came along. This just gives me one more reason. The intensity in his blue eyes made Valerie's heart beat faster. She looked away, unsure of the emotions stirring within her. Grief and fear were expected, but this warmth, this flicker of something else when Quinn looked at her, that was unexpected and confusing. It's decided then, Quinn said, taking her silence for agreement. You'll stay here while we gather evidence against Hartley. Mrs. Abernathy can help you get settled, maybe teach you how things work around the ranch. I grew up on a farm, Mr. Blackwood, Valerie reminded him. I know how to work. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Quinn, he corrected again, and I'm sure you do. That'll be helpful since we're short-handed these days. Most of the hands left after the last time Hartley's men came calling, Mrs. Abernathy explained. Can't blame them, they've got families to think about. Who's left? Valerie asked. Just Pedro and Caleb, Quinn said. Good men, loyal, they've been with me since I started this place. And now me, Valerie added quietly. I owe you my life, Mr. Quinn. The least I can do is help around the ranch. Something shifted in Quinn's eyes, a softening that made him look younger. We'll start tomorrow then, he said. For now, get some rest. It's been a long day. That night, As Valerie lay in bed listening to the creaks and settling sounds of the unfamiliar house, she couldn't help but wonder what the coming days would bring. Her life had been upended in the most terrible way, yet here she was, planning to fight back against the man who had destroyed everything she loved. It seemed impossible, yet the alternative, running away, letting Hartley win, was unthinkable. With that resolve in her heart, she finally drifted off to sleep. The next few days fell into a rhythm that helped distract Valerie from her grief. She rose early each morning and helped Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast for the men. Then, while Quinn, Pedro, and Caleb went about the business of running the ranch, she assisted with household chores or worked in the vegetable garden. In the afternoons, Quinn began teaching her to shoot. They would walk to a quiet spot behind the barn where he had set up targets, and he would patiently show her how to load, aim, and fire his old Remington revolver. "Stand firm," he instructed on their third day of practice. "Both feet planted, the gun will kick, but you need to control it." Valerie did as he directed, trying to ignore the warmth of his presence behind her, his hands occasionally adjusting her stance or her grip on the weapon. "Now breathe in," Quinn said, his voice close to her ear. "Aim, breathe out slowly and squeeze the trigger, don't pull it." She squeezed the trigger and the gun bucked in her hand. The shot went wide, missing the target entirely. "Better," Quinn said encouragingly. "At least you didn't drop it this time." Valerie lowered the gun, frustration evident in her face. "I'll never get the hang of this." "Yes, you will," Quinn assured her. "No one's a natural at first, it takes practice." "We don't have time for practice," Valerie reminded him. Hartley could send his men any day. Quinn's expression grew serious. "All the more reason to keep trying, again." She raised the gun, determined to do better. This time her shot at least hit the board the target was mounted on, though nowhere near the center. "See, improvement," Quinn said, the corner of his mouth lifting in a half smile. "A few more days and you'll be ready to join a shooting gallery." Despite her frustration, Valerie couldn't help but smile back. These moments with Quinn were becoming the bright spots in her days. He was demanding but fair, pushing her to improve while acknowledging her progress. And more than that, there was a connection growing between them, an ease that belied the short time they'd known each other. "Quinn," she said, lowering the gun again, "have you always lived here, on this ranch?" He seemed surprised by the personal question. "No," he answered after a moment. "I grew up back east in Pennsylvania. My father was a doctor." "How did you end up here then?" Quinn's eyes took on a distant look. "War has a way of changing a man's path. After Gettysburg, I couldn't go back to the life I'd known." "You fought in the Civil War?" Valerie asked, surprised. He seemed too young, but then she realized he must be older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his late 30s. "Union cavalry," Quinn confirmed. "Came west after it ended, looking for, I don't know, peace maybe. A place where a man could build something with his own hands, not tear things down." "And did you find it? Peace?" A shadow crossed his face. "For a time, my wife Elizabeth and I started this ranch together." Wife. The word hit Valerie like a physical blow. Of course a man like Quinn would be married. She felt foolish for the disappointment that washed over her. "She died," Quinn continued, his voice flat. "Influenza 7 years ago, our son too, he was only 4. "I'm so sorry," Valerie said softly, understanding now the sadness that sometimes lingered in his eyes. "That's a terrible loss." Quinn nodded once, as if accepting her sympathy but unwilling to dwell on it. "It was a long time ago. The point is, Miss Morgan, I came here looking for a fresh start. I built this place from nothing, and I won't let Hartley take it." The fierce determination in his voice reminded Valerie why she was learning to shoot in the first place. "Neither will I," she said with equal firmness. "He's taken enough from both of us." Quinn's expression softened as he looked at her, something like admiration in his eyes. "You're stronger than you look, Valerie Morgan." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the intimacy of it sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "Again," he said, nodding toward the target. "And this time, imagine it's Hartley's smug face you're aiming at." Valerie raised the gun, focusing all her anger and grief into the task. This time, her shot struck near the center of the target. Quinn's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Well now," he said with a low whistle, Seems like you found your motivation. A small, fierce smile curved Valerie's lips. I believe I have. As the days passed, Valerie settled more fully into life at the ranch. She grew comfortable with Mrs. Abernathy's routines, learned the rhythms of the work, and began to view the modest home as a sanctuary rather than a temporary shelter. She still grieved for her parents and their lost farm, but the sharp edge of pain had begun to dull to a more manageable ache. And then there was Quinn. The more time she spent with him, the more she was drawn to his quiet strength, his unwavering sense of right and wrong, and the gentle way he treated her despite the hardness in his past. She found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved confidently over his horse's flanks, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the thoughtful furrow of his brow when he was planning the next day's work. It was dangerous, these feelings. She knew that. They were in the midst of a fight for their very survival, with no guarantee of victory. And even if they succeeded against Hartley, Quinn had given no indication that he saw her as anything more than a responsibility, a neighbor in need of help. Yet still, her heart quickened when he entered a room, and her dreams at night were increasingly filled with images of blue eyes and strong hands. A week after her arrival at the ranch, Quinn announced at breakfast that he would be riding into town. We need supplies, he explained, and I want to see if I can find out anything about Hartley's plans. Is that safe? Valerie asked, concern evident in her voice. Safe enough, Quinn replied. Hartley's men don't usually cause trouble in broad daylight in the middle of town. Too many witnesses. That didn't stop them at my farm, Valerie pointed out. That was isolated with no one around for miles, Quinn said. This is different. Besides, I need to speak with a few people who might be willing to stand against Hartley when the judge arrives. Who? Mrs. Abernathy asked skeptically. Most folks in Silver Creek are either in Hartley's pocket or too scared to cross him. Not everyone, Quinn insisted. Doc Williams, for one, he's patched up too many of Hartley's victims to stay silent, and Reverend Miller, and maybe old Sam Tucker at the newspaper. Be careful, Valerie said softly. Please. Quinn's eyes met hers across the table, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. I will, he promised. I'll be back by sundown. After he'd gone, Valerie helped Mrs. Abernathy with the washing, her mind never far from Quinn and the dangers he might face in town. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising a summer storm. He'll be caught in the rain, Valerie fretted, looking up at the sky as they hung the last of the sheets on the line. Quinn's weathered worse than a little rain, Mrs. Abernathy assured her. He'll be fine. But as the afternoon wore on and the storm moved in, bringing with it driving rain and occasional thunder, Valerie's worry grew. She found herself going to the window every few minutes, searching the road for any sign of Quinn's return. You're wearing a path in my floor, Mrs. Abernathy observed as Valerie made yet another trip to the window. Sit down and help me shell these peas. It'll keep your hands busy. Reluctantly, Valerie joined the older woman at the kitchen table. I'm sorry, she said, reaching for a handful of pea pods. I just have a bad feeling. Quinn can take care of himself, Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. He's been doing it for years. How long have you known him? Valerie asked, genuinely curious, the housekeeper's wrinkled face softened with memory. Since he first came to Montana Territory, must be 15 years now. He hired me after his wife died, needed someone to keep house and help with little Jamie. Her eyes grew sad. Such a sweet child. The spitting image of his father, it nearly broke Quinn when they both took sick. He said it was influenza, Valerie said quietly. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. Swept through the whole area that winter. Quinn nursed them day and night, but she shook her head. Some things even the strongest man can't fight. He blames himself, Valerie guessed, understanding now some of the shadows that haunted Quinn's eyes. Of course he does. That's the kind of man he is, takes responsibility even for things beyond his control. The older woman gave Valerie a shrewd look. You've grown fond of him. It wasn't a question, and Valerie didn't try to deny it. Yes, she admitted, though I shouldn't. My parents are barely cold in their graves, and here I am. Life doesn't stop for grief, Mrs. Abernathy said gently. And your parents would want you to find happiness, wouldn't they? Yes, but the sound of hoofbeats interrupted her. Valerie jumped to her feet and rushed to the window. Through the rain, she could make out a rider approaching Quinn, hunched against the downpour. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by concern as she noticed how slowly he was riding, how he seemed to be listing slightly in the saddle. "Something's wrong," she said, already moving toward the door. She ran out into the rain, heedless of the fact that she wore no coat or bonnet. Quinn saw her coming and straightened in the saddle, but not before she noticed the dark stain spreading across his left side. "You're hurt," she cried as she reached him. "It's nothing," Quinn said, but his face was pale beneath his tan and his voice was strained. "Just a scratch." "A scratch doesn't bleed like that," Valerie argued, reaching up to help him dismount. He was heavier than she expected, and he leaned on her more than he probably intended to. "Mrs. Abernathy," she called as they made their way slowly toward the house. "We need help." The housekeeper appeared in the doorway, took one look at Quinn's bloodied shirt, and sprang into action. "Get him to the sofa," she directed. "I'll fetch hot water and bandages." Together, they managed to get Quinn into the house and onto the sofa in the living room. He was breathing heavily by the time they laid him down, his face gray with pain. "What happened?" Valerie demanded as she helped him remove his wet coat. "Hartley's men," Quinn said through gritted teeth. "They were waiting for me outside the general store, said they had a message from their boss." "And the message was a bullet?" Valerie asked, her voice rising with anger and fear. "Actually, it was a knife," Quinn corrected, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace. "The bullet came later when I was leaving town, missed me but spooked my horse. I got thrown and landed hard on some rocks." Mrs. Abernathy returned with a basin of steaming water, clean cloths, and a bottle of whiskey. "Move aside, Valerie. Let me see how bad it is." Valerie reluctantly stepped back, her heart racing with fear for Quinn. The housekeeper carefully lifted his blood-soaked shirt, revealing a deep gash along his ribs. "You'll need stitches," Mrs. Abernathy pronounced, her mouth set in a grim line. "And you've likely got broken ribs from that fall too. Valerie, pour him a generous measure of that whiskey." Valerie hurried to comply, her hands shaking as she poured the amber liquid into a glass. Quinn took it from her, his fingers briefly touching hers. "Don't look so worried," he said softly. "I've had worse." "That's not as reassuring as you think it is," Valerie replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Quinn managed a weak chuckle, then winced at the pain it caused. He drained the whiskey in one swallow. "Do your worst, Mrs. A," he said, bracing himself. What followed was a grueling half-hour as the housekeeper cleaned and stitched the wound with a steady hand that spoke of previous experience. Quinn remained stoically silent throughout, though sweat beaded on his forehead, and his jaw was clenched, so tight Valerie feared he might crack teeth. She held his hand, offering what comfort she could. His fingers gripped hers with crushing strength whenever the pain was at its worst, but she didn't pull away. Finally, Mrs. Abernathy tied off the last stitch and sat back. "That should hold," she said, wiping her hands on a cloth. "But you've lost a fair amount of blood, and those ribs need binding. You're not going anywhere for a few days, Quinn Blackwood." Quinn looked like he wanted to argue, but he was too exhausted to put up much of a fight. "Hartley knows," he said instead, his voice weak, "about Valerie being here." His men mentioned her by name. Valerie felt a chill run through her. "How? Someone must have seen us together," Quinn said. "Or maybe they found tracks leading from your farm to mine. It doesn't matter now. What matters is they know and they'll be coming." "Let them come," Valerie said fiercely, surprising herself with her vehemence. "We'll be ready." Quinn's eyes found hers, and despite his pain and exhaustion, there was a warmth in them that made her heart skip. "We will," he agreed, "but not today. Today I think I need to rest." "Of course," Valerie said, reluctantly releasing his hand. "Can we move you to your bedroom? You'll be more comfortable there." With Mrs. Abernathy's help, they managed to get Quinn to his feet and into his bedroom, a Spartan space with little decoration beyond a framed photograph on the dresser, a young woman with a serious expression and a small boy on her lap. Elizabeth and Jamie, Valerie realized, the family Quinn had lost. Once he was settled in bed, Mrs. Abernathy excused herself to prepare a broth for dinner, leaving Valerie alone with Quinn. She sat on the edge of the bed, uncertain what to say or do. "Thank you," Quinn said finally, breaking the silence, "for your help." You've done far more for me, Valerie replied. This is the least I can do in return. Quinn's hand found hers again, his touch gentle this time. It's not about keeping score, Valerie, it's about doing what's right. The use of her first name sent that now familiar warmth through her again. Is that why you're helping me? Because it's right. He looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes intent on her face. At first, yes, he admitted. But now there are other reasons. What reasons? Valerie asked, her heart suddenly pounding. But Quinn's eyes were already closing, exhaustion and blood loss pulling him toward sleep. We'll talk tomorrow, he murmured. Stay close tonight, please. I will, Valerie promised, though she wasn't sure if he heard her. His breathing had already deepened into the rhythm of sleep. She stayed beside him for a long time, watching the rise and fall of his chest, her mind whirling with questions and emotions she wasn't ready to name. Eventually, she rose and quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Abernathy stirring a pot of broth on the stove. How is he? The housekeeper asked. Sleeping, Valerie replied. He's very pale. He'll be all right, Mrs. Abernathy assured her. Quinn's as tough as they come, but he'll need looking after for a few days. And with Hartley's men likely to come calling. We need help, Valerie finished for her. Can we send for Pedro and Caleb? They're out checking the north pasture, aren't they? Yes, but they won't be back until tomorrow. The older woman's face was grave. Tonight it's just us. Valerie straightened her shoulders, determination replacing fear. Then we'll have to be enough. As dusk fell, they prepared as best they could. Valerie checked Quinn's Remington and the rifle he kept over the fireplace, making sure both were loaded and ready. Mrs. Abernathy moved a cot into Quinn's room so Valerie could sleep nearby, keeping watch over him through the night. I'll take the first watch in the living room, the housekeeper said. Wake you at midnight to switch. Valerie nodded, too tense to argue. She looked in on Quinn one more time before trying to get some rest on the cot. He was still sleeping, though not peacefully. His face was drawn with pain even in slumber, and occasionally he would mutter something unintelligible. Lying in the darkness, listening to Quinn's labored breathing and the soft patter of rain on the roof, Valerie found herself praying for Quinn's recovery, for their safety through the night, and for the strength to face whatever came next. Eventually, exhaustion overcame anxiety and she drifted into a light, troubled sleep. She woke with a start to the sound of a floorboard creaking. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then she remembered Quinn's room, the cot beside his bed. She sat up, listening intently. There it was again, a soft, creaking sound from the main part of the house. Was it Mrs. Abernathy moving about, or someone else? Quietly, she slipped from the cot and picked up the Remington from where she'd placed it on the small table. Quinn was still asleep, his breathing more even now. She moved silently to the door and opened it just enough to peer out. The living room was dark, lit only by the dying embers in the fireplace. At first, she saw nothing amiss. Then a shadow moved near the front door, a shadow too large to be Mrs. Abernathy. Valerie's heart leaped into her throat. Someone was in the house. Where was Mrs. Abernathy? Had they harmed her? As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she could make out the figure of a man creeping toward the hallway toward Quinn's room. Acting on instinct, Valerie stepped out of the room, the Remington raised. Stop right there, she said, her voice steadier than she felt, or I'll shoot. The man froze, then slowly turned to face her. In the faint glow from the fireplace, she could see he was a rough-looking individual with a scraggly beard and a scar running down one cheek. Well now, he drawled, if it ain't the Morgan girl herself, saves us the trouble of hunting for you. Where's Mrs. Abernathy? Valerie demanded, trying to keep her voice from shaking. The man grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. The old woman, she's taking a little nap in the kitchen. Didn't hurt her none, just knocked her out. Can't say the same for you and Blackwood, though. Mr. Hartley was very clear about what he wants done with you two. You're not doing anything to anyone, Valerie said, tightening her grip on the gun. Get out, now, the man laughed. You really think you can shoot me, little girl? I bet you've never even fired a gun before. You'd be wrong about that, Valerie replied, remembering Quinn's lessons. Stand firm, breathe in, aim, breathe out and squeeze, don't pull. She saw the moment the man decided she was bluffing, saw him tense to lunge at her. Without hesitation, she squeezed the trigger. The shot was deafening in the confined space. The man staggered backward, clutching his shoulder where blood was already spreading across his shirt. "You shot me," he exclaimed, his voice a mix of pain and disbelief. "And I'll shoot you again if you don't leave," Valerie warned, already adjusting her aim for a second shot. "Right now." For a moment, the man looked like he might try to rush her despite his wound, then common sense seemed to prevail. "This ain't over," he growled, backing toward the door. "Hartley will hear about this, he'll send more men." "Tell him to come himself next time," Valerie said, her voice hard with anger. "Tell him I'm ready for him." The man spat on the floor, then turned and stumbled out the door into the night. Valerie waited until she heard the sound of a horse galloping away before lowering the gun, her hands suddenly shaking with delayed reaction. "Valerie," Quinn's voice called weakly from the bedroom. "What's happening?" She hurried back to him, finding him struggling to sit up despite his injury. "Stay still," she urged, gently pushing him back against the pillows. "One of Hartley's men broke in. I shot him." Quinn's eyes widened. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine," Valerie assured him, touched by his concern for her when he was the one injured. "He's gone now, but Mrs. Abernathy?" She suddenly remembered the housekeeper. "He said he knocked her out. I need to check on her." "Go," Quinn said, though she could see how much he wanted to come with her. "But be careful, there might be more of them." Valerie hurried to the kitchen, where she found Mrs. Abernathy slumped in a chair, a nasty bruise forming on her temple but otherwise unharmed. The older woman came to with a groan as Valerie gently shook her. "What happened?" she asked groggily. "One of Hartley's men," Valerie explained, helping Mrs. Abernathy to her feet. "He's gone now, but we should lock all the doors and windows. Can you stand?" The housekeeper nodded, leaning on Valerie for support. "I'm all right, just a bump on the head. Did he hurt Quinn?" "No, I stopped him before he got to Quinn's room." Valerie didn't elaborate on how she'd stopped him, but Mrs. Abernathy's sharp eyes took in the gun still clutched in her hand. "Good girl," she said approvingly. "Quinn's been teaching you well." Together, they secured the house as best they could, then returned to Quinn's room to tell him what they'd found. "Just the one man?" Quinn asked, his brow furrowed in thought. "As far as I could tell," Valerie confirmed. "Do you think there will be more tonight?" Quinn shook his head slowly. "Not tonight. He'll go back to report and Hartley will send a larger group tomorrow or the next day. We need to be ready." "Pedro and Caleb will be back tomorrow," Mrs. Abernathy reminded him. "That will help." "It won't be enough," Quinn said grimly. "We need more men." "Who?" Valerie asked. "You said yourself most of your hands have left." Quinn was silent for a moment, considering. "There's a ranch about 20 miles west of here. Belongs to a man named Jack Reynolds. We've helped each other out in the past. He's no friend of Hartley's either." "I could ride there tomorrow," Valerie offered. "Ask for his help." "No," Quinn said firmly. "It's too dangerous for you to be out there alone." "More dangerous than staying here waiting for Hartley's men to return," Valerie challenged. "Besides, they won't be expecting me to leave. They think they have us trapped here." Quinn looked at her for a long moment, his expression a mix of concern and admiration. "You're a remarkable woman, Valerie Morgan." The unexpected compliment made her cheeks warm. "Does that mean you agree with my plan?" "I don't like it," Quinn admitted. "But you're right, we need help and soon. Mrs. Abernathy can tell Pedro and Caleb what's happening when they return. They can prepare the ranch while you're gone." "I'll leave at first light," Valerie decided. "I can take Willow, she's fast and she knows me." "Take the mountain trail," Quinn advised. "It's longer but less exposed, and Valerie." His hand found hers, holding it tightly. "Be careful, I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you." The raw emotion in his voice made her breath catch. "I will," she promised. "I'll come back to you, Quinn." "You have my word." Mrs. Abernathy cleared her throat. "We should all try to get some rest while we can. Tomorrow will be a long day." Valerie nodded, reluctantly releasing Quinn's hand. As she settled back onto the cot, her mind raced with plans for the journey ahead and the dangers that awaited. But underneath the fear and uncertainty, there was a new feeling, a warmth that spread through her whenever she thought of the way Quinn had looked at her, the way he'd held her hand. In the midst of all this chaos and violence, something beautiful was growing between them. And that, perhaps more than anything else, gave her the courage to face whatever came next. Dawn broke clear and cool after the night's rain. painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Valerie had been awake for hours, too anxious about the day ahead to sleep. She had checked on Quinn several times during the night, relieved to find his fever had not returned and he seemed to be resting more comfortably. Now, as she prepared to leave, he insisted on getting out of bed to see her off, despite Mrs. Abernathy's protests. "You'll tear your stitches," the housekeeper scolded as she helped him into a clean shirt. "I'll be fine," Quinn insisted, though his face was pale with the effort of standing. "I need to make sure Valerie has everything she needs for the journey." Outside, Valerie had already saddled Willow and packed a small bag with food and water. She was checking the cinch one last time when Quinn appeared in the doorway of the house, leaning heavily on Mrs. Abernathy's arm. "You shouldn't be up," Valerie chided, hurrying to his side to offer additional support. "Had to see you off properly," Quinn said, his voice stronger than it had been the night before. "Do you have the map I drew?" Valerie patted the pocket of her borrowed riding skirt. "Right here." "And the letter for Mr. Reynolds, and enough food for the day. I'm well prepared, Quinn," he nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "Remember, stay on the mountain trail until you reach the old mining camp, then head west along the creek. Reynolds' ranch is in the valley beyond the ridge." "I'll find it," Valerie assured him, "and I'll be back with help as soon as I can." "If you're not back by tomorrow night," Quinn began, his expression troubled. "I will be," Valerie interrupted firmly. "Nothing will keep me from returning." Something shifted in Quinn's eyes, a decision made. With surprising strength for a man so recently injured, he pulled her into his arms, mindful of his wounded side. "Valerie," he said softly, his breath warm against her hair, "there's something I need to say in case—" "Don't," she whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Don't say it now. Tell me when I come back." He drew back slightly, looking into her eyes. "Promise me you will come back." "I promise," Valerie said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Quinn's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her face. "I'll hold you to that, Miss Morgan." Then, before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both gentle and fiercely possessive. It lasted only a moment, but it sent a current of warmth through Valerie that banished the morning chill. When they parted, she was breathless, her cheeks flushed with color. Mrs. Abernathy was studiously looking in another direction, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Now go," Quinn said, his voice husky. "The sooner you leave, the sooner you can return." Valerie nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She mounted Willow with practiced ease, then looked down at Quinn once more. "Take care of yourself," she managed to say. "Don't do anything foolish while I'm gone." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'll try," with a final nod to both Quinn and Mrs. Abernathy. Valerie turned Willow toward the trail and urged her into a trot. She didn't look back, though she wanted to. Instead, she focused on the path ahead and the vital mission she had undertaken. The mountain trail was as Quinn had described, winding and steep in places, but sheltered by dense pine forests that would hide her from any watching eyes on the plains below. Willow was sure-footed and seemed to sense the importance of their journey, responding eagerly to Valerie's commands. As they climbed higher, Valerie's thoughts kept returning to Quinn, the worry in his eyes as she left, the unexpected kiss that had left her dizzy with emotion. In the short time she had known him, he had become the center of her world, a fixed point around which everything else revolved. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it filled her with a strange, fierce joy. By midday, she had reached the abandoned mining camp Quinn had mentioned. It was a ghost of a place, with collapsing wooden structures and rusting equipment scattered about. She paused there to rest Willow and eat a little of the food Mrs. Abernathy had packed for her, sitting on a fallen log. Valerie studied the crude map Quinn had drawn. From here, she needed to follow the creek westward for about 5 miles, then cross the ridge to reach Reynolds' ranch in the valley beyond. If she pushed on without delay, she could be there by late afternoon. The sound of voices made her freeze, bread halfway to her mouth. Men somewhere nearby. And they were coming closer. Quickly, Valerie gathered her things and led Willow behind one of the larger structures, an old ore processing building with most of its roof gone but its walls still standing. She peered cautiously around the corner, her heart racing. 3 riders entered the clearing, men with the hard faces and watchful eyes of those accustomed to violence. They wore no identifying marks, but Valerie had no doubt they were Hartley's men. Had they tracked her here? Or was this just an unlucky coincidence? "Should have waited for the rest of the boys," one of the men was saying as they dismounted. "Blackwood's place is well defended. Hartley wants it done today," another replied. A tall man with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat said he's tired of waiting. "Besides, it's just Blackwood who's already wounded, that old woman and the Morgan girl. How much trouble could they be?" The third man, who had remained silent until now, spat on the ground. "Tell that to Peterson. Girl shot him clean through the shoulder last night, might lose the arm." Valerie felt a grim satisfaction at this news, followed immediately by renewed fear. They were definitely Hartley's men, and they were on their way to attack the ranch. How many more were joining them, and how much time did she have to get help? She needed to move, to continue her journey to Reynolds' ranch. But to do so, she would have to somehow get past these men without being seen. The alternative, waiting for them to leave, would waste precious hours she didn't have. Carefully, she led Willow toward the back of the building, hoping to circle around and reach the creek without being spotted. But Willow, sensing her tension, snorted nervously and pawed at the ground. "What was that?" one of the men called out sharply. "Probably just a deer," another replied. "This place is full of them. Check it out anyway," the first man ordered. "Can't be too careful." Footsteps approached Valerie's hiding place. She pressed herself against the wall, one hand on Willow's nose to keep her quiet. The footsteps came closer, then paused just around the corner from where she stood. Time seemed to slow as Valerie weighed her options. She could try to run, but they would surely hear her and give chase. She could hide and hope they didn't search too thoroughly, or she could fight. Her hand moved to the Remington tucked into her belt. Quinn had insisted she take it, and now she was grateful for his foresight. She had 5 shots. There were 3 men. The odds weren't impossible, but a gunfight was risky if she missed or if they were better shots. The decision was made for her when the man rounded the corner, his gun already drawn. He was as surprised to see her as she was to see him, and for a crucial second he hesitated. Valerie didn't. She drew the Remington and fired in one smooth motion, just as Quinn had taught her. The shot caught the man in the leg, and he went down with a howl of pain. Shouts came from the other side of the building. Valerie grabbed Willow's reins and swung herself into the saddle, knowing she had only moments before the other men came running. "Run, girl," she urged, digging her heels into Willow's sides. The mare leaped forward, nearly trampling the wounded man as they burst from behind the building. The other 2 men were rushing toward them, guns drawn. Valerie fired again, not aiming to hit them but to make them dive for cover, which they did. In the confusion, she guided Willow past them and toward the trail that led to the creek. Shots rang out behind her, but she was already among the trees, Willow running full out. Valerie leaned low over the mare's neck, branches whipping past her as they fled. She could hear the men shouting, then the sound of horses giving chase. The creek was visible ahead, a silver ribbon cutting through the forest. Valerie guided Willow into it, the cold water splashing up as the mare plunged forward. They followed the creek for several hundred yards, the water masking their tracks, before scrambling up the far bank and into the dense forest beyond. For nearly an hour, they pushed on at a grueling pace, stopping only when Willow began to tire. Valerie listened intently but heard no sounds of pursuit. Either the men had given up the chase or she had successfully lost them in the forest, but she had no time to rest. The encounter had cost her precious minutes, and now she had even more urgent news for Reynolds. Hartley's men were on the move, planning to attack the ranch today. Quinn, Mrs. Abernathy, and the returning ranch hands would be vastly outnumbered. With renewed determination, Valerie urged Willow onward, following the creek as it wound its way westward. The sun was already past its zenith, the shadows lengthening as afternoon waned. She had to reach Reynolds' ranch before dusk. The terrain grew more challenging as they approached the ridge that separated the creek valley from Reynolds' land. Valerie dismounted to lead Willow up the steepest parts, her legs aching with the effort, but her resolve never wavering. Finally, as the sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon, they crested the ridge. Below them lay a broad valley, greener and more lush than the land around Quinn's ranch. In the distance, Valerie could make out buildings, a large ranch house, barns, corrals filled with horses. Reynolds spread. Relief flooded through her, giving her a second wind. She remounted Willow and urged her down the slope toward the ranch, no longer concerned with stealth or caution. Only speed mattered now. As they approached the ranch, men appeared from the barns and outbuildings, alerted by the sound of hoofbeats. Several carried rifles, watching her approach with wary eyes. "I need to speak with Jack Reynolds," Valerie called out as she drew closer. "It's urgent. Quinn Blackwood sent me." At the mention of Quinn's name, the men lowered their weapons. One of them, a weathered man in his 50s with a gray streaked beard, stepped forward. "I'm Reynolds," he said, his sharp eyes taking in her disheveled appearance and the lather on Willow's flanks. "What's happened to Quinn?" Valerie dismounted quickly, her legs nearly buckling after the long ride. "He's been injured," she explained breathlessly. "And Hartley's men are planning to attack his ranch today. We need help." Reynolds' expression hardened at the mention of Hartley. "Tom," he called to one of the men nearby, "take care of the lady's horse. The rest of you get your gear. We ride in 10 minutes. He turned back to Valerie. "Come inside, miss." "Morgan," Valerie supplied. "Valerie Morgan." Recognition flickered in Reynolds' eyes. "Morgan. You're Edward Morgan's daughter. Heard about what happened to your folks. Terrible business." "Yes," Valerie said, the grief still sharp despite everything else that had happened. "That's why I'm with Quinn now. He took me in after the attack." Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like Quinn. Always doing the right thing, no matter the cost." He gestured toward the house. "Come, you can tell me everything while my men prepare." Inside the spacious ranch house, Valerie quickly related all that had happened: her parents' murder, Quinn rescuing her from the wheat field, the attack that had left him wounded, and what she had overheard at the mining camp. "How many men does Hartley have?" Reynolds asked when she had finished. "I'm not sure," Valerie admitted. "I saw 3 at the mining camp, but they mentioned waiting for the rest of the boys. I think there might be quite a few more." Reynolds nodded grimly. "Hartley's been recruiting gunmen from as far as Denver. Word is he's got at least 20 on his payroll now." "Can you help us?" Valerie asked, fear clutching at her heart. 20 men against Quinn, who was injured, and perhaps 3 or 4 others if Pedro and Caleb had returned. "Of course," Reynolds said without hesitation. "I've been expecting something like this." Hartley's been getting bolder, throwing his weight around. It's time someone stood up to him. He rose from his chair. "I can bring 15 men, all good with a gun. Will that be enough?" "It will have to be," Valerie said, standing as well. "We should leave immediately." Reynolds regarded her with newfound respect. "You're not what I expected, Miss Morgan. Quinn's a lucky man." Before Valerie could respond to this unexpected comment, the door opened and a young man entered, carrying a rifle and wearing a determined expression. "Pa, the men are ready," he said to Reynolds. "Horses are saddled and we've got extra ammunition packed." "Good work, Daniel," Reynolds said approvingly. "This is Miss Morgan. She'll be riding back with us." The young man, barely more than a boy, really nodded politely to Valerie. "Madam. Your horse is rested and watered. She's a fine animal." "Thank you," Valerie said, touched by the consideration. "And thank you all for your help. Quinn, Mr. Blackwood will be grateful." Reynolds chuckled. "Quinn, is it? Well, let's make sure he's alive to show his gratitude. Mount up, everyone. We've got a hard ride ahead of us." Outside, the ranch yard was a flurry of activity as men checked weapons, tightened saddle cinches, and prepared for battle. Valerie found Willow looking much refreshed after her brief rest, and she stroked the mare's nose gratefully before mounting. Reynolds rode up beside her on a powerful black stallion. "We'll take the valley route," he said. "It's faster than the mountain trail and speed matters more than stealth now." Valerie nodded her agreement, and soon they were galloping across the valley floor, a small army of determined men with Reynolds at their head and Valerie riding proudly beside him. The sun was sinking rapidly now, casting long shadows across the land as they raced against time. She prayed they would not be too late. Back at Quinn's ranch, the atmosphere was tense as Pedro and Caleb returned from their work in the north pasture to find Mrs. Abernathy anxiously watching the road and Quinn. pale but determined, cleaning his rifle on the porch despite his injury. "What's happened?" Pedro asked, dismounting quickly when he saw Quinn's bandaged torso and grim expression. "Where's Miss Valerie?" "She's gone to Reynolds' place for help," Quinn explained, wincing as he shifted position. "Hartley's men are coming, today most likely." Caleb, younger than Pedro but equally loyal, looked around at the quiet ranch. "Just the four of us against Hartley's crew, those ain't good odds, boss." "If Valerie makes it to Reynolds in time, we'll have reinforcements," Quinn said. "Our job is to hold out until they arrive, Mrs." Abernathy emerged from the house carrying a tray with coffee and sandwiches. "Eat something," she urged the men. "No telling when you'll get another chance." As they ate, Quinn outlined his plan for defending the ranch. The house would be their stronghold, with its thick log walls providing good cover. They would barricade the doors and windows, leaving only narrow gaps for shooting. "What about the barn and the horses?" Pedro asked, concern evident in his voice. The seasoned ranch hand had been with Quinn since the beginning and knew how much the animals meant to his boss. Quinn's face darkened. "We'll have to let them loose. Better they run free than be shot in their stalls if Hartley's men decide to burn the place." It was a painful decision, but a necessary one. After they finished eating, Pedro and Caleb went to release the horses from the barn and corrals, sending them galloping toward the distant hills where they would be safe until the trouble passed. Inside the house, Quinn and Mrs. Abernathy gathered all the weapons and ammunition they could find. Besides Quinn's rifle and revolver, they had Pedro's and Caleb's guns, an old shotgun that had belonged to Quinn's father, and the spare rifle normally kept in the bunkhouse. "Not much of an arsenal," Quinn muttered as he counted out the ammunition. "It'll have to do," Mrs. Abernathy said practically. "Now sit down before you fall down. You need to save your strength." Quinn complied reluctantly, knowing she was right. His side was throbbing painfully, and he could feel the pull of the stitches with every movement, but physical discomfort was the least of his concerns. His thoughts kept returning to Valerie, riding alone through dangerous country. Had she reached Reynolds safely? Was she even now on her way back with help? Or had something happened to her? The idea of Valerie in danger made his chest tighten with a fear more intense than anything he'd felt in years. In the short time she'd been at the ranch, she had awakened feelings in him he'd thought long dead: tenderness, protectiveness, and a growing affection that was rapidly becoming something deeper and more profound. When he'd kissed her that morning, it had been an impulse born of fear that he might never see her again. But the moment their lips touched, he knew it was more than that, much more. And from the way she had responded, the softness in her eyes when they parted, he dared to hope she felt the same. Now all he could do was wait and pray and prepare to defend what was his. The first sign of trouble came as the sun was setting, painting the western sky in shades of crimson and gold. Pedro, who was keeping watch from an upstairs window, called out, "Riders coming, at least a dozen, maybe more." Quinn joined him at the window, squinting against the glare of the setting sun. Sure enough, a large group of mounted men was approaching from the east, still distant but moving steadily toward the ranch. In the lead was a figure Quinn recognized even at this distance: Maxwell Hartley himself, riding a showy palomino and wearing his trademark white hat. "Hartley's leading them personally," Quinn said, his voice tight with anger. "He must be confident of victory." "Or he wants to make sure the job is done right this time," Pedro suggested grimly. Quinn nodded, his jaw set. "Get downstairs. Tell Caleb and Mrs. to take their positions. It's starting." As Pedro hurried to relay the message, Quinn took one last look at the approaching riders. There were at least 15 of them, possibly more hardened men, well armed and determined. Against 4 defenders, one of them injured and another an elderly woman. Unless Valerie and Reynolds arrived soon, the outcome seemed inevitable. But Quinn had never been one to surrender without a fight. If this was to be his last stand, he would make it count. He made his way downstairs, moving carefully to avoid aggravating his wound. In the living room, Mrs. Abernathy was loading the shotgun with a competence that spoke of previous experience. "Where did you learn to handle that?" Quinn asked, surprised despite the gravity of the situation. The housekeeper smiled grimly. I wasn't always a cook and housekeeper, Quinn. My first husband was a buffalo hunter, taught me to shoot before he got himself killed in a card game. She pumped the shotgun with practiced ease. Never thought I'd need the skill again, but I'm glad I remember. Quinn nodded, a new respect in his eyes. Take the back window. It has the best view of the approach from that side. If anyone tries to circle around behind us, make them regret it. With pleasure, Mrs. Abernathy said, moving to her assigned position. Pedro and Caleb were already at the front windows, rifles ready. Quinn joined them, grimacing as he knelt behind a makeshift barricade of furniture. They're slowing down, Pedro reported. About 200 yards out now. Let them make the first move, Quinn instructed. We want witnesses to know who started this fight. The riders came to a halt about 100 yards from the house. For a moment, there was an eerie silence as the two sides assessed each other. Then Hartley urged his palomino forward a few paces. Blackwood, he called, his voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. I know you're in there. Come out and face me like a man. Quinn exchanged glances with Pedro, who shook his head slightly. It's a trap, the ranch hand murmured. He wants you in the open. I know, Quinn replied. Then raising his voice, he called back, What do you want, Hartley? What's rightfully mine? Hartley shouted. This land and the Morgan girl, send her out and maybe I'll let you live. A cold fury filled Quinn at the threat to Valerie. She's not here, he called back. And even if she was, I'd die before I handed her over to the man who murdered her parents. Hartley's face contorted with anger, visible even at this distance. Then die you shall, Blackwood, all of you, he turned to his men. Burn them out, kill anyone who tries to escape. At his command, the riders spread out, some dismounting to take cover behind rocks and trees, others circling to approach the house from different angles. Several carried torches, already lit and smoking in the gathering dusk. Here they come, Quinn said grimly. Make every shot count. The first shots came from Hartley's men, bullets thudding into the thick log walls or whistling through the narrow gaps left for defense. Quinn and his small band held their fire, waiting for clear targets. When a man with a torch broke from cover and ran toward the house, Quinn took aim and fired. The man fell, the torch rolling harmlessly into the dirt. Another tried the same approach from a different angle, and Pedro dropped him with a well-placed shot. For several minutes, a furious exchange of gunfire filled the air. Quinn and his defenders were outgunned, but had the advantage of cover and position. They managed to hold Hartley's men at bay, but it was clear they were gradually being worn down. Ammunition was limited, and the attackers kept coming. They're working their way to the barn. Caleb called, firing at a shadowy figure moving through the gathering darkness. Let them have it, Quinn replied, conserving his ammunition for threats closer to the house. The horses are gone, and there's nothing else they're worth dying for. Sure enough, moments later, flames erupted from the barn as Hartley's men set it ablaze. The fire cast a hellish glow over the scene, illuminating the ranch yard and making it harder for the attackers to approach unseen. At least we can see them better now, Mrs. Abernathy observed dryly from her position at the back window. The battle continued as full darkness fell, the burning barn providing the only light besides the occasional muzzle flash. Quinn could feel his strength ebbing as pain and blood loss took their toll. His shots were becoming less accurate, and he had to rest more frequently between firing. How much ammunition do we have left? He asked during a brief lull in the shooting. Not much, Pedro admitted. Maybe 20 rounds between us, Quinn nodded grimly. Make them last, help will come. He had to believe that, had to believe in Valerie. She wouldn't fail them. As if in answer to his thoughts, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached his ears, many horses, approaching fast from the west. For a moment he feared it was more of Hartley's men. But Pedro, whose hearing was sharper, broke into a rare smile. That's not Hartley's bunch, he said confidently. Those are Reynolds' riders. I'd know the sound anywhere. Hope surged through Quinn. Keep firing, he ordered. Make Hartley think we're still alone. Let's give Reynolds the element of surprise. Outside, Hartley was growing frustrated with the stubborn resistance. What's taking so long? He shouted to his men. It's just 4 people in there. Rush the house, all of you. His men hesitated, knowing that such a frontal assault would mean casualties, but Hartley's rage was fearsome to behold. "Do it now," he snarled, "or I'll shoot you myself." Reluctantly, a group of gunmen began to move toward the house, using what cover they could find. Quinn and his defenders picked off two of them, but the others kept coming. It was going to be close. And then, from the darkness beyond the burning barn, came a thunderous volley of gunfire. Hartley's men scattered in confusion as riders burst into the ranch yard from the west. Reynolds and his men with Valerie in their midst. "Quinn," Valerie cried, her voice carrying over the chaos. "We're here." The tide of battle turned instantly. Caught between defenders in the house and Reynolds' force at their backs, Hartley's men began to fall back in disarray. Some threw down their weapons and surrendered, while others fled into the night. Hartley himself, seeing his plan collapsing around him, turned his palomino to escape. But Reynolds, a superb horseman, cut him off. The two men faced each other in the firelit yard. "It's over, Hartley," Reynolds said, his rifle aimed squarely at the land baron's chest. "Throw down your gun." Hartley's face contorted with rage and hatred. For a moment, it seemed he might try to shoot his way out. Then, slowly, he lowered his pistol to the ground. "This isn't finished," he spat. "I have friends in high places. You'll regret this, Reynolds." "The only regret around here is that we didn't stop you sooner," Reynolds replied. "Before innocent people died." He nodded to two of his men. "Tie him up. We're taking him to Judge Hammond when he arrives, along with any of his men who are still breathing." Inside the house, Quinn sagged against the wall, exhaustion and relief washing over him in equal measure. They had survived. The ranch was damaged but still standing, and Valerie had returned just as she promised. "Quinn," her voice came from the doorway, breathless and anxious. "Quinn, are you all right?" He turned to see her framed in the entrance, her hair wild from the hard ride, her face smudged with dirt but her eyes shining with relief, and something else, something that made his heart skip a beat. "I'm here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You came back." "I promised I would," Valerie replied, crossing the room to kneel beside him. Her hand touched his face gently, as if reassuring herself that he was real and whole. "Are you hurt? Your wound?" "It's fine," Quinn assured her, though in truth his side was throbbing painfully. "What about you?" "We heard shooting earlier." "I ran into some of Hartley's men at the old mining camp," Valerie explained, "but I got away." Quinn's eyes widened with concern. "You could have been killed." "So could you," she countered, "but we're both still here." Her hand still rested against his cheek, warm and comforting. "That's what matters." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the chaos around them fading into the background. Then Quinn leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his side, and kissed her, not the gentle, questioning kiss of that morning, but a deep, certain kiss that spoke of all he felt for her. Valerie responded with equal fervor, her arms encircling his neck, careful of his injury but unwilling to let him go. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I was going to wait for a more appropriate moment," Quinn said, his voice low and intimate. "But nearly dying makes a man reconsider his timing. I love you, Valerie Morgan. I think I have since I found you hiding in that wheat field." Tears filled Valerie's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "And I love you, Quinn Blackwood. You saved me in more ways than you know." Their moment of privacy was interrupted as Reynolds entered the house, followed by several of his men. "Hate to break this up," he said, his weathered face creased in a knowing smile, "but we've got wounded to tend to and prisoners to secure. The fight's over, but there's still work to be done." Quinn nodded, reluctantly releasing Valerie but keeping her hand firmly in his. "What about Hartley?" "Trussed up like a turkey and under guard," Reynolds reported with satisfaction. "Along with 8 of his men, the rest either fled or are beyond earthly justice now. Any casualties on our side?" Quinn asked, dreading the answer. "2 of my men wounded, none seriously," Reynolds replied. "Your people are all safe, though your barn's a total loss, I'm afraid." "Barns can be rebuilt," Quinn said, relief evident in his voice. "People can't be replaced." The next few hours were a blur of activity as the wounded were treated, prisoners secured, and the ranch put in order as much as possible. Mrs. Abernathy, tireless despite her age, prepared food for Reynolds' men while they worked. Pedro and Caleb rounded up the horses that had been set free earlier, finding most of them grazing peacefully in a nearby meadow. By dawn, A semblance of normalcy had returned to the ranch. The prisoners, including Hartley, had been taken to town under heavy guard, where they would await the arrival of Judge Hammond. Reynolds and most of his men had returned to their own ranch, leaving a few behind to help with repairs and provide additional security in case any of Hartley's remaining men got ideas about revenge. Quinn, finally yielding to exhaustion and pain, had allowed Valerie to help him to his bedroom, where he now lay propped up on pillows, watching as she changed the bandage on his side. "You're getting good at that," he observed as she carefully cleaned the wound, which had indeed torn open during the fighting but was now beginning to heal again. "I've had practice," Valerie replied with a small smile, "though I hope after this we can go a while without any more injuries." "That would be nice," Quinn agreed, catching her hand as she finished securing the fresh bandage. "Valerie, about what I said earlier." "You said you love me," she reminded him, her eyes meeting his. "Did you mean it?" "With all my heart," Quinn affirmed, "but I know it's sudden." "You've been through so much, lost so much, if you need time." Valerie silenced him with a gentle finger on his lips. "I don't need time," she said softly. "I know what I feel. When I thought I might lose you yesterday, I realized how empty my life would be without you in it. You gave me hope when I had none, Quinn. You gave me a home when mine was destroyed, and somewhere along the way you gave me your heart. It's yours," Quinn said simply, "for as long as you want it." "Forever, then," Valerie replied, leaning down to kiss him gently. "Because that's how long I plan to keep it." 3 weeks later, Judge Hammond arrived in Silver Creek as scheduled. The circuit judge was a stern, imposing figure with a reputation for fairness and an intolerance for corruption. The trial of Maxwell Hartley and his men was the talk of the territory, drawing spectators from as far as Helena and Great Falls. Valerie testified about the murder of her parents, her voice steady despite the pain of recounting that terrible day. Quinn spoke of the attacks on his ranch and the systematic intimidation Hartley had employed against local landowners. Reynolds and several others provided additional testimony about Hartley's methods and the reign of terror he had established in the region. The evidence was overwhelming. After deliberating for less than an hour, Judge Hammond found Hartley guilty of murder, attempted murder, arson, and a host of other crimes. The sentence was hanging for Hartley and prison terms of varying lengths for his men. "Justice has been served," the judge declared as he closed the trial. "Let this be a lesson that in this territory the law applies to all men equally, regardless of wealth or influence." As they left the courthouse, Valerie held tightly to Quinn's arm, a mix of emotions washing over her. There was relief that Hartley would never harm anyone again, satisfaction that her parents' deaths had been avenged, and a lingering sadness that nothing could bring them back. "Are you all right?" Quinn asked gently, sensing her conflicted feelings. "Yes," Valerie replied after a moment. "It's just, I wish they could have known you, my parents, they would have liked you." Quinn's arm tightened around her waist. "I wish I could have known them too. They must have been remarkable people to have raised a daughter like you." Valerie smiled up at him, love evident in her eyes. "They were, and they taught me to recognize a good man when I found one." They walked in comfortable silence through the bustling streets of Silver Creek, nodding to acquaintances and accepting congratulations from well-wishers. The story of their stand against Hartley had spread throughout the territory, turning them into something of local heroes. "What happens now?" Valerie asked as they reached their horses, tethered outside the hotel where they had been staying during the trial. Quinn looked at her thoughtfully. "That depends on you," he said. "Your family's land is legally yours now. You could rebuild the farm if you wanted to." Valerie considered this for a moment, then shook her head. "That chapter of my life is closed," she said. "The land will always be special to me, but—" She hesitated, suddenly shy. "My home is with you now, Quinn, if you'll have me." Quinn's face broke into a rare, full smile that transformed his usually serious features. "I was hoping you'd say that," he admitted, "because I have something to ask you." To Valerie's surprise, he knelt before her right there on the dusty street, heedless of the curious onlookers who stopped to watch. "Valerie Morgan," he said, looking up at her with eyes full of love, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" I promise to cherish you, protect you, and love you for all the days of my life. Joy bubbled up inside Valerie, bright and pure. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, Quinn Blackwood, I will marry you. Quinn rose to his feet and swept her into his arms, kissing her thoroughly as the townspeople around them broke into applause and cheers. When they finally parted, both were laughing with the sheer happiness of the moment. Let's go home, Quinn said, helping her mount her horse Willow, who had become as much a part of their story as they were themselves. Home, Valerie repeated, savoring the word. I like the sound of that. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch with Mrs. Abernathy, Pedro, Caleb, Reynolds and his son, and a few other close friends in attendance. Valerie wore her mother's wedding dress, lovingly restored by Mrs. Abernathy from the smoke-damaged garment Quinn had found in the ruins of the Morgan homestead. In her hair, she wore wildflowers gathered from the very wheat field where Quinn had found her that fateful day. As they exchanged vows beneath the shade of the old oak tree in the yard, with the newly rebuilt barn gleaming white in the background, Valerie felt a sense of completion, of having come full circle. The journey had been painful and marked by tragedy, but it had led her here to this moment, to this man who had become her world. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Miller declared. Quinn, you may kiss your bride. Quinn needed no further invitation. Gathering Valerie close, he kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Don't hide from me again, he whispered against her lips, echoing the words he had spoken when he first found her in the wheat field. Valerie smiled up at him, her heart overflowing with love. Never, she promised. Not ever again. Epilogue 5 years later, the summer sun bathed the ranch in golden light as Valerie stood on the porch, watching Quinn teaching their 4-year-old son, Edward, to ride his first pony. The boy, named after Valerie's father, had his mother's auburn hair and his father's intense blue eyes. He sat proudly on the gentle little Shetland, his face alight with excitement as Quinn led the pony around the corral. Not too fast, Quinn, Valerie called, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child grew. He's still little. Quinn grinned up at her, his face more relaxed and open than it had been when they first met. The years had been kind to them, bringing prosperity to the ranch and deepening the love they shared. He's a natural, Val, Quinn called back, just like his mother. Edward beamed at the praise. Look, Mama, I'm riding all by myself. I see, darling, Valerie replied, her heart full to bursting with love for her family. You're doing wonderfully. The ranch had flourished under their joint care. With Hartley gone, the railroad had still come through, but on terms that benefited the local landowners rather than exploiting them. Quinn and Valerie had expanded their operations, breeding some of the finest horses in the territory and establishing a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Mrs. Abernathy still ruled the kitchen, though she had finally agreed to accept help from a young woman from town who came in 3 days a week. Pedro had married a local widow and built a small house at the edge of the ranch property, where he continued to serve as Quinn's foreman. Caleb had gone east to school, funded in part by Quinn, who recognized the young man's sharp mind and ambition. Valerie's parents' land had been transformed into a memorial of sorts, a public park with a small schoolhouse, built with funds from the sale of a portion of the property. It was a fitting tribute, Valerie thought, to two people who had valued education and community above all else. As she watched her husband and son together in the warm afternoon light, Valerie felt a contentment that she had once thought impossible in the dark days after her parents' deaths. Life had a way of surprising you, of bringing beauty from ashes and joy from sorrow. Quinn looked up at that moment, as if sensing her thoughts, and their eyes met across the yard. The love in his gaze was as strong as it had been on their wedding day, perhaps even stronger for all they had shared since then. I love you, he mouthed silently, and Valerie's heart swelled with happiness. I love you too, she replied, knowing he could read the words on her lips even if he couldn't hear them. Edward's delighted laughter filled the air as Quinn urged the pony into a slightly faster walk, the sound mingling with the gentle breeze rustling through the wheat fields that stretched beyond the ranch house fields, much like the one where their story had begun. Valerie had no longer needed to hide, not from Quinn, not from life, not from the future. She had found her place in the world beside the man who had found her when she was lost and loved her back to wholeness. And for that, she would be forever grateful.